Once upon a time, I knew I was going to be an Oscar-winning actor. I was. I believed it with all of my heart. I had my first acting lessons when I was about 5, and I would continue to do classes, plays, skits, and whatever else I could get my little hands on, clear through college, and all the way past my undergraduate degree in theater. I auditioned twice for and failed to get into the prestigious postgraduate program at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Arts. But never once did it occur to me, ever, without having ever been seen by an agency and my Los Angeles-based auditions at nearly 0, that I wasn't ever going to not be an Oscar-winning actor. I just hadn't figured it out yet. I love being an actor. I've loved it with every ounce of my soul, and I would daydream often about the work that I would get to do, the people I would get to act alongside, and the mark that my art would leave. Shakespeare's complete works was my Bible. Kind of still is. I watched movies and TV for study when I was unable, due to real-life work and familial constraints, to actually be an actor. I've done audiobooks from underneath a blanket in my bedroom. Acting was me, and I was acting. Period. End of discussion. Anything else that I did was supplemental, even if it wasn't financially sound. And in the funny way that life can be, I auditioned my way very last minute into the most frustrating production I've ever been a part of. This particular production of Dracula ended up with very life-changing friendships, one of which was with the person who played the title character, Jason. Now, I remember one rehearsal sharing vociferously, and I have no shame in admitting obnoxiously, about my views as an avowed atheist. Sharing's probably a soft word for it. Subjecting is probably more accurate. And I remember my castmates listening, or appearing to, anyhow, with one or two nodding alongside in understanding. Now, when I tell you that I recall vividly the taste of my foot in my mouth, I'm not kidding. I heard brakes screeching in my head when Jason smiled pleasantly and said, "Oh, those are some very interesting viewpoints. You know, I'm a minister." It wasn't long before I was very gently and politely invited to services and talk about my nightmare. I had never been to a church service that I ever enjoyed, and the last thing I wanted to do was to try to attend another one. They had never served me before, and at the ripe old age of 25, I saw no reason in this universe that it would start now. "We are your people, KC," he kept telling me. "I promise." No thanks. Church isn't for me. Now, these invitations would go on for about 2 years. One morning, while sitting alongside my partner, Dan, I received another Facebook notification for yet another service, this time somewhere between Thanksgiving and Christmas of that year. "You know," I said to Dan, "if Jason is half as good at being a minister as he is at being an actor, maybe the services won't be that bad." Ever practical and equally non-religious, my partner raised a brow before saying, "Babe, you hate church. You hate getting up early. You would rather sit here on the couch with me and drink a cup of coffee and watch football." "Yeah," I conceded. "You're right." In the 8 months that followed, Dan became increasingly ill. I spent a large portion of my life in hospital rooms with him, and in August of that year, I held his hand when he died. I was just shy of my 28th birthday, and my life and all of my hopes and dreams and plans had gone up in smoke. Like that. I was so very lost and so very alone. Grief was consuming me. I don't remember making the decision to reach out, but I know about a month later I sent Jason a message. I need a bereavement group. Do you have any resources? And this was in no way a surprise to him, and he immediately invited me to the one that he runs at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Fullerton. And in the funny way that life can be, after being held so gently and lovingly that Friday morning by that very small group of people, I finally decided I might as well show up at church. And like a defiant teenager, I sat right front and center, deliberately. Jason smiled at me. It's good to have you here. And of course that became, come to Camp de Benneville Pines. And then that became, will you do this reading for the service? And then that became, would you like to be a worship associate? And then that became, I've already spoken to the worship chair. When he's ready to step down, I'll take over for him. And then that became, now no pressure or anything, but have you ever thought about ministry? Now, someone out here or out there might be thinking, hey, great, nice to meet you. What does this have to do with reason? First of all, thank you for going on this journey with me, literally and figuratively. I am Tapestry's intern minister for the next 2 years, and when I serve other congregations in my future, it will be with Tapestry in my heart that I am able to do so. You have my deepest gratitude and utmost blessings. Now to the point of practicality. Most people are creatures of habit, and any type of change takes much rationality. We look at our options, we weigh our potential outcomes, and we make sound, informed decisions, especially when others apart from ourselves are involved. Your typical person doesn't just up and quit their job. An average university student doesn't just suddenly drop out. And if you're like me, after a lifetime of little or negative experiences with organized religion, you certainly don't end up at church on a Sunday just because you're bored. Change happens. Come hell or high water, it is coming for us whether we are prepared for it or not. Now, in my case, I threw caution to the wind. When Reverend Jason asked me if I had ever thought about being a minister, that little voice in my head screamed, yes, literally today while you were talking. I couldn't tell you what the sermon was about that day, but I do know that something in it resonated in my soul, and I remember thinking as I looked out at the congregation that morning, if I could give back a fraction of the love and guidance that they've given to me, my time on this earth will be well spent. Now, yes, it could be argued that I completely lacked any rationality because I felt like I had nothing to lose. I'm not married, I have no children, and I have no mortgage to pay. Technically, I was free to do as I chose. But starting fresh, hearing that call to ministry, it was something that I didn't have the language to understand before. And running with it once I did, I found remarkably easy. I took a leap of faith, and thankfully, so far so good. Now, it's not to say that this has been easy. Following a call in your heart takes work, planning, effort, intentionality. If we want change to work for us, we have to work with the change that we're given. Now, just saying, I'm going to be a minister would have been a huge mistake, with major implications not only for myself, but for the communities that I have served and those communities I will serve in the future. And since then, there have been countless hours of discernment and reflection and so very many tears as I grapple with my whys, my theology, and my purpose. It is a conversation with myself that I have no doubt I will have for the rest of my life. Now, maybe there's someone out there thinking, Casey, this is all great, but what does this have to do with this month's theme of reason? Great question. I don't know. Okay. That's not entirely true. See, we don't always love those big spiritual what-ifs. Many of our congregations rely far more on logic and reason than they do on spirituality, or that stuff that I've called the good heart stuff. Now, the point of me telling you this story is to illuminate the balance between the head and the heart, the rational with the spiritual, what we know with what we feel. And it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that each one of us is better at one of those than the other, but for the record, neither is best. This brings up an interesting theological idea of free will. And then this is the idea of the choice whether we can create our own destiny or not. Now, depending on who you ask, we either have it or we don't. And then there are some who argue that even though we do have it, we don't technically have it because it's preordained that we're going to make a decision, so is it really free will after all? And I suppose that depends on what you do with the information that we have. There's an episode of the long-running, wildly popular British time travel episodic Doctor Who called Turn Left. Now, in the episode, who ends up being the Doctor's companion, really his best friend Donna, is driving in a car with her mother. They come to a stop sign, and there are two options. Turn left in the direction of the temp job at a large, well-respected firm that Donna eventually works for, that eventually leads to her meeting the Doctor, or she can listen to her mother's, quite frankly, bad advice and turn right in the direction of the job that her mother deems better. This entire scene is the pair of them arguing over this choice. Donna feels so strongly that this temp job will open opportunities that she would never otherwise get. Her mother, in her very mother-knows-best way, is convinced that it would be a waste of her daughter's time. In the end, Donna is convinced to her mother's thoughts against her emotional pull. Now, this conundrum comes when she follows her mother's advice. Instead of listening to her heart, see, Donna is exceptionally important to the universe throughout space and time. By turning right and ignoring her intuition, she's not in the right place at the right time to stop the Doctor from doing something that inevitably leads to his death. This sets off a catastrophic series of events across the universe, including a miserable existence for herself and her family. All of these things which in the initial timeline, if she had just turned left, would have just absolved everything. The Doctor would still be alive, the two of them would work together continuously to save everybody from everything, and all would be well. In the end, in the wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey way the show works, Donna ends up with an opportunity to go back in time and change the course of history. She ultimately sacrifices her future self to put herself on the right track, fixing the timeline and erasing all the tragedy that the rationality caused. If only it was that easy. When presented with the chance to follow her heart, she changes the universe. Another way to think about it, Donna follows her heart, goes in the direction she feels right. Her mother wants her to follow logic, going in the direction that she knows is right. This is not to pit mothers against daughters or to favor heart over head. What it really starts to get at is discerning when we listen to what part of us and how we can really make the realities it gives us work for us. I hope hearing about that episodic, you were able to see yourself a little bit in Donna's place. Our first principle tells us that we all have inherent worth and dignity. Perhaps it's foolhardy to assume that our presence or lack of it will change the literal universe, but it can and often does matter to those that we love and hopefully ourselves too. Take a moment, if you will, and think about a time you found yourself in a situation where, against all careful planning and rationality, you ended up with a reality that you never even remotely anticipated. How did that feel? What did you think? Now be honest, if you fought, how hard did you fight? Last week, Reverend Kent reminded us that we are, by nature, emotional beings, and that we tend toward rationality in order to help justify our emotional leanings. How often do we feel something and spend hours rolling it over in our minds, thinking and sometimes overthinking why we feel that way? We're pretty terrible at just feeling and sitting in that feeling, and most importantly, letting that feeling guide us. Now, maybe that's because we've been told our entire lives to lead with our head and not with our heart. It's a very Western ideology to separate those two parts of our being, and far too often, we don't allow them to work together. And, following intuition can be hard. It can be scary and overwhelming. When we rationalize, we can talk ourselves into or out of anything. And sometimes it can be against our better judgment, whatever better judgment means to you. And when we pair that spiritual sense of knowing with our actual sense of knowing, however, we can uncover a guidance that can lead us to a much different, deeper way of knowing. Of course, it's not something we can just do, and that's where spiritual practice can come in very much in handy. And please go with me on this, because if you heard the words spiritual practice and you were given the choice between that and a root canal, and you chose the root canal, you're not alone. Luckily, a spiritual practice can be just about anything. Meditation and yoga are popular practices borrowed from other cultures. You could also sing, or whittle, or fish, or swim, or color, or read tarot cards, or go stargazing, whatever feels right to you. The key to these practices is consistency and intentionality. We have to know that they won't always feel successful, and that's okay. It's finding the things that help us get in tune with that spiritual knowing in order to cultivate it enough to have it work alongside our rational brain without judging that which might feel irrational. I encourage you, if you want to grow this other way of knowing, to do so with openness and with a willingness to see where spirit takes you. With the same curiosity you approach our fourth principle of the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. There's no one right way to do this, just as there is no one right way in which to experience and listen to spirit. But when you come to that fork in the road, if you feel so inclined, if you feel that tug on your heartstrings or hear that soft little voice in your head, consider turning left, just to see where it takes you. You might end up on a very unexpected journey, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find yourself hearing a calling that you never imagined.